Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, Tina's Leg. I know it's been a while since I've actually posted a full-length video. I'm in the middle of a super crazy season. My daughter's getting married in a few weeks. All the wedding preparation that's happening, as well as my daughter is getting ready to move to Texas. It's been this huge emotional roller coaster for me, and I have just needed to not do YouTube for a little while and focus on my family. In case you were wondering, that is why. However, if you are new to my channel or you're finding me for the first time, my name is Tina, and the reason my channel is called Tina's Leg is because I was born missing the fingers on my right hand, and I was born missing my right foot, and so I wear an artificial leg. And this channel is usually about just funny things and real life situations I find myself in because of my leg. But today, the topic is definitely going to be more serious, and it's going to be more my experience growing up with a mom who struggled with an eating disorder. I have had this on my heart to share since there has been so much talk and publicity out there on all the social media platforms regarding Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo from the cast of Wicked and how much weight they have both lost. It's really sad to me because when I was growing up, there was a huge push for all the models to be super rail thin and look skeletal, and then there was all this fight to not focus on women's weight and focusing on extreme thinness as far as beauty goes, and being able to accept beauty in all different shapes and sizes. And I feel like we have come such a long way from that point. And so to see this cast of Wicked be rail thin, and Ariana Grande to be able to see her shoulder bones throughout the whole thing, and even every little spinal vertebrae, that is not healthy. And honestly, that is not what we should be portraying to our children as a healthy perspective for women's weight either. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my story and my journey and what it was like growing up with a mom who struggled most of her whole life with an eating disorder. And my mom has passed away actually at the end of January. I can't even believe it. It's going to be 14 years. So she is not here to tell her story. So I am going to do my very best to relay her story and her journey for her. And then I'm going to give you my perspective on what it was like growing up in that environment where an eating disorder kind of ruled our home at times, and what her recovery process looked like, as well as how all of that changed the trajectory of my own life, and also what I have done or tried not to do to put any of that pressure on my kids as well. So if you struggle with an eating disorder, or you know somebody who does, this video is going to be for you. Or if you're just curious as to what my story is, I hope that this will shed some light, or you gain a better understanding of what it looks like when somebody does struggle with an eating disorder. I am going to preface it by saying that I will be revealing some of my mom's trauma and what she went through as a child, because I do believe it pertains very much so to her eating disorder, and also what the recovery process looked like for her as well. My grandma, her mom, got pregnant at 16 years old, and they were not married. And when she told my grandpa that she was pregnant, my grandpa at some point, I'm not sure if it was that same day or a little bit later on, he did punch my grandma in the stomach in order to try and end my mom's life. That obviously did not work, but babies pick up on everything. And my grandma swore that when my mom was born, she literally came out hating my grandpa. She did not want to be held by him, and she would scream anytime that my grandpa tried to hold her. And so that, I think, started just a very rocky relationship between her and my grandpa from that point on. And My grandma also was a very young mom and didn't know how to parent. And so when they punished using a belt. And I would definitely say there was a lot of physical abuse that happened in that home when my mom was a little girl. She was the oldest of 3 siblings total, so she had 2 younger sisters, and she was also a fierce protector. So she would a lot of times take the beatings or take the punishment if one of her younger sisters was in trouble, and she would take the blame so that they would not get the spankings or the whippings, and she would go ahead and take that. Her younger sister got diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis as a child, and they lived in Trenton, New Jersey, and so the doctors recommended that if my aunt was going to be able to walk and have a normal life, they would have to come out here to Arizona for the heat and the sunshine in order to help her body. And so that is when they moved out to Arizona. My mom was 17 years old, and she ended up having to transfer high schools and ended up here at a high school where she did meet my dad working at a job at Walmart. And I did do an interview with my dad several months ago. I will put the link up here if you want to see the video of that. And my dad kind of shares a little bit more of the story of meeting my mom and falling in love and what that journey was like. But for today's video, I am just going to be sharing her story. So after they meet and fall in love, my other grandma, my dad's mom, did not like my mom. Now, my dad, he was an only child, and I don't think that my grandma thought any girl out there would ever be good enough for her son, especially not someone who was as strong-willed or outspoken as my mom was. And so there was just a lot of tension. My grandma was actually very cruel to my mom and said some very hurtful things, hoping to split them up and break them apart so that my dad wouldn't marry her. And it was about this time that my mom lost a significant amount of weight. When my dad met my mom, he said that she was a very healthy weight. He fell in love with her. She was beautiful. And he went away for a few months during their engagement. And when he came back, she had dropped at least 20 or 25 pounds in just a couple months. And he was young. He didn't understand what was going on or what was happening to her. He just thought maybe it was a phase she was going through and that she would get better. Well, after they got married, my mom got pregnant right away. And she was still very much underweight. And the first trimester of pregnancy, she was extremely nauseous. She couldn't keep any food down, could barely keep water down. I know that she ended up having to go to multiple doctor's appointments and keep tabs to make sure that I was healthy and that she was still doing okay. She did not get on any kind of anti-nausea medication because there was a drug out there at the time that did cause birth defects. And I have met people that have the exact same hand as mine, and they had said it was from this particular drug that was allowed on the market in the 70s. But that was not the case for my mom. It was the amniotic band syndrome, which is where in development, the amniotic sac can have bands or thicker areas that can then cut off circulation and cut off growth to certain parts of the body. So that is what happened in my case. That can be due to dehydration though, and malnutrition, which I have recently found out. However, the doctor told my mom that at the time they thought I was completely healthy and doing okay. They were just concerned for her and her health. And I know that she had gone to the hospital and gotten IV treatments to get rehydrated and to try and gain some of that weight that she had lost back. Further on in her pregnancy, I do believe she did gain weight and ended up delivering me at a pretty healthy weight. And so there were no issues in regards to that. When I was born, they realized that there were obviously some things that had gone wrong. After I was born, my mom did go into a severe depression, and she blamed herself for my birth defects. And she had to make a choice whether or not she was going to continue to believe that and want to just have no motivation to eat or to live, or she had to make the choice to get healthy again for the sake of raising me. I know my dad was super scared at that point. My mom was hospitalized a couple different times, and my dad was left at home taking care of a newborn baby who I had my own struggles that I was dealing with. And I just can't even imagine how terrified my dad would have been, having to take care of me and not knowing if his wife was going to be okay, and how quickly her health declined. My mom did end up deciding that she wanted to fight for her life, and she wanted to be a mom and wanted to get healthy again. After she came home and they really started their journey of parenting, my mom went to nursing school, my dad went to the police academy, and so things for them kind of got back into a normal swing. However, my mom had never fully gained all of the weight back to the weight that she had been when they were dating. So my mom was always very skinny growing up. It turns out my mom struggled with bulimorexia, which I know that's an old term. I think they have a new term for it now, but it's basically where she would go for periods of time starving herself or severely undereating, and then when she would eat even what was a normal amount of food, she would feel the need to purge. And so that can be different for each person who struggles with that. So I'm going to go over the different types of eating disorders that there are. There is overeating, usually attached to emotional eating, and people maybe don't have a healthy relationship with food. So if they get stressed or sad or depressed or emotional, and they don't know what to do in a situation, and they use food as a coping mechanism to help them feel better, and in that case they tend to emotionally eat or overeat. And then you would have bulimia nervosa, which is where you would eat maybe a large amount of food, and then you feel guilty and shame about it, and then you would purge, self-induced vomiting, throwing it up after, or you can purge through exercise and over-exercise because you feel guilty about what you ate. And then there is anorexia nervosa, which is just very restrictive, lots of obsessive thoughts regarding food and calories, and it is a very disciplined eating disorder, very controlled and very rigid in thought processes and allowing yourself what you allow yourself to eat and not eat. And usually that is associated with categories that would include like bad foods to stay away from, things like that. So in their mind, they think there are only certain things that they're allowed to eat or allow themselves to eat. And as an anorexic, you can also over-exercise in order to keep the weight down as well. So it's just a very rigid, disciplined type of eating disorder. And then you can have any kind of combination of all of those together. And what my mom struggled with was bulimorexia. So she would go through seasons and time periods where she would hardly eat anything, and then when she would eat a normal meal or go out to a restaurant and treat herself to a normal meal, then she would come home, feel guilty, and she would self-induce vomiting in order to get that out of her system. And so I did not know growing up that all of this was happening until I became a teenager. And then I started noticing the different patterns of behavior. And I'm just gonna share what some of those things look like for me. I would come home from school, and if my mom had gotten home from work and maybe didn't know I was home yet, I would come in the house and call her name, and if she didn't hear me, I would like knock on the bedroom door. I would knock to see where she was, and there were multiple times that I would hear her throwing up in the bathroom. So that was one scenario. Another scenario is my mom was an excellent cook. She loved to cook great meals for us. However, she didn't like to eat them. And so she would make this incredible meal and put it on the table for us, and my dad and I would go to sit down at the table. Now, I do have a younger brother who was adopted, and he is 12 years younger than me. So when she was at the height of her eating disorder, he was really little, and I don't think he remembers a ton about how that looked like for me, or he has his own experiences with those struggles that she had. So for me, at the dinner table, she would then pick a fight between either my dad or I in order to have an excuse to leave the table so she wouldn't have to finish the meal. And that obviously was extremely unhealthy, disruptive. It was very hard to enjoy a meal as a family because she would be so stressed out about not wanting to eat it that she would get very agitated and then find an excuse or a reason to pick a fight to then leave the room and not eat the meal. How that has affected me as a mom and growing up raising my own family, meal times are super important to me. That is when we connect as a family. At the end of the day, we share what happened. We just get that time together. And so dinner time for me was very important because that was something I didn't have as a kid. And when I did have it, it was usually very stressful. And so I have wanted to change the pattern of that for my own family to become something that is very fun and healthy. And I love to cook, and I love to cook for people and enjoy that quality time of connection. It's very, very important to me. Another thing that would happen a lot when I was a teenager was I met my husband at a young age, and so when we were dating and he would come over and have dinner with us, if my parents decided they wanted to go out for dinner, they would take us with them. And so there was one night in particular that we got in the car, we went to a restaurant. We sat down at the restaurant, we looked at the menu, we ordered sodas, and we were getting ready to order, and my mom was looking at the menu and kind of freaked out and said, "Oh, I can't eat here," and she would make up some type of an excuse or a reason why. Either they didn't have what she wanted, or all of a sudden she was craving something different at a different restaurant, or it could have even been the environment, like if there was loud kids in the restaurant, or if she didn't like the server for whatever reason. She would make up an excuse and a reason to leave that restaurant and go somewhere else. So this particular day, we went to one restaurant. There was something she didn't like about it. My dad had to pay for the drinks. We ended up leaving, going to another restaurant. We sit down at a different restaurant, and the same thing happens. And she finds a reason, something she doesn't like, makes an excuse. She doesn't want to eat there. She ends up going and waiting in the car. We end up apologizing to the server. My dad pays for whatever drinks were ordered, and we ended up leaving again. That day, we ended up at 4 different restaurants. And I will never forget my husband, who is my boyfriend then, he leans over in the back seat of the car and he looks at me and he says, "You know this isn't normal, right?" I was like, yeah, I know this isn't normal, but it was normal for us. It was normal for my dad. And it was a very unhealthy pattern. Actually, after being in therapy and when my mom was in treatment, we realized how much power the eating disorder had in our family and how much it controlled. And so up until that point, it was something like I was not allowed to talk about. I was not allowed to ask her questions about it. She would totally shut down. She would yell at me. She would tell me it wasn't my business. and that I didn't need to worry about it. And so it wasn't until she dropped to a very severe low weight and it was affecting her job. Now, she was a nurse, and if you are malnourished and not getting the nutrients that your body needs, it starts to affect you cognitively. My mom would faint. She would have some fainting spells. She would have a hard time processing thoughts. And so I think it was starting to interfere with things at her workplace as well as their marriage and our family. And so my dad tried to get her into a couple different treatment centers. I know one of them, I don't even know if she was there for 24 or 48 hours. She checked herself out after admitting. And so they finally found a excellent treatment center that happened to be in Wickenburg, Arizona, and it was called Remuda Ranch. And it was a eating disorder treatment center for women and teenagers who struggled with it, and that's what they specialized in. It was an incredible program, and it was several months long of a program, anywhere from 30 to 90 days. And my mom ended up having to take a leave of absence from her job and went into treatment. At this point in my life, I was 16. And so we would drive up, my dad and I would drive up on the weekends to go visit my mom. And we ended up doing family therapy sessions. And for me, that was life-changing because it was the first time I was able to ask her questions and find out why all of this was happening. Because for me, in a lot of ways, she did protect me. She didn't want me to know the reasons why. I just knew there were these behaviors and that she struggled with throwing up after meals, and I knew that she struggled with wanting to eat. I didn't know why. So there was a huge disconnect for me. And the reason for that was she was really wanting to protect me. And so when we ended up in family therapy and I was actually meeting with the therapist without my mom in the room, they asked me a lot of questions about food and my relationship with food. And I just was kind of blown away because I was like, well, I don't understand why this has anything to do with food because I didn't have those same issues and struggles. And so I didn't know any better, and it didn't affect me in that way. I've always had a good relationship with food. Yes, maybe a little overindulgent now and then, and now that I'm in my 50s and wanting to lose weight and dealing with all the hormone changes, it has been harder. But growing up, I never even thought twice about it. And so going into family therapy and then learning all of the trauma from my mom's past and what some of the abuse looked like in that home, and then learning about how my other grandma treated her before her and my dad got married, it was very eye-opening and revealing as to, wow, like it was definitely multi-layered. Her treatment during that time, I think she was there at least 2 to 3 months. I don't remember all of it. I was in school and managing my own life at the same time. And so when she came home, I did notice she was significantly better. There had been a lot of healing, and she had gone through some forgiveness. She did do family sessions with both her mom and her dad, and was able to get some healing in regards to that. So after that season of time, there was a significant improvement in her health, in her behavior, in her joy, and I did notice all of that improve. However, the holidays would come and go. There would be different things that she would struggle with, and she never really fully overcame the eating disorder, I don't think, until the last few years of her life. And I say that because she still struggled. After I had my kids and she would be babysitting my kids, there were times that I would come home from work and I would hear her in the bathroom throwing up. And I would just be so angry. I would be pounding on the bathroom door, screaming at her. what is going on that you feel like you still have to be doing this? And so it was very hard for me. I felt like I was the parent at that point, and trying to understand how come she hadn't still been able to really conquer some of those patterns and behaviors in her life. So overall, she was doing better, or she would have long stretches of time where she was okay, and then something would trigger a painful memory, or something would happen and trigger those patterns to start all over again. And it was something she constantly had to work on and choose every day to not engage in the eating disorder. And how that affected me was I ended up deciding to get a job at the same company that she went in for treatment. They had opened a residential treatment center for women with eating disorders in Chandler. And I was so excited because I knew about the program. I knew what it was like. I had been through the family therapy sessions. And so I applied and got the job, and I worked there for 12 years. I was a mental health technician and worked with the women there, and I would say I absolutely loved it. And I came in with a different perspective of being on the outside, living with somebody who struggled with an eating disorder. And so I was able to relate to them in a different way and kind of bring a different perspective into my job. One of the things that I will talk about as far as the recovery process, they did a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, and that is CBT. And that's basically changing your thought patterns and replacing the bad, unhealthy thoughts with truthful, healthy thought processes, and replacing bad patterns with new patterns. There was a lot of exposure therapy involved in that. We took the patients on snack challenges, restaurant challenges. They had to prep and plan their own meals, and we would go around and help them. We would help make sure they were measuring out all the ingredients properly, and each of them got a meal plan. They met with a therapist, dietitian, psychiatrist, as well as did individual and group therapy, art therapy, things like that. It was a very integral program involving all kinds of modalities to help bring the patients into full recovery. I learned so much during that season of time and was able to help so many women and be a part of their journey. And I will say that you can't force somebody to want recovery. It doesn't matter what they struggle with. They have to want it for themselves. And we saw that by sometimes we would get teenage girls coming in who were only there because their parents wanted them there, and they would do the program and just kind of go through the motions, and then they would go home and relapse and end up back in our program a couple months or a couple years later. I would encourage you, if you do know somebody who is struggling with an eating disorder, you can encourage them, you can do an intervention, you can try and persuade them, but unless it is something they really want for themselves, it's going to be very hard to convince them to get help. There was some significant things that needed to happen in my mom's life for her to actually come through the other side and fully step into a life of recovery. And for her, that was forgiveness. I don't think she ever really forgave my grandpa or my dad's mom, my other grandma, for the way that they had treated her and things that they had done until she was older. And honestly, she just kind of came to the end of herself and realized that if she wanted to live in true peace and in true joy and be free of all the torment of the eating disorder, that she had to do some deep soul searching and get to the very root of the issues. And that for her ended up being forgiveness. She had to fully forgive my grandpa and fully forgive my grandma. And there was a significant event that occurred where they had gone to California and my mom had gone to visit her dad, and she saw him. He was walking up in the parking lot of the restaurant, And my mom went running to him. And he still talks about that event to this day. He is still alive. My grandpa broke down into tears. Not one time had my mom ever run into the arms of her dad as a kid, even as an adult. So here she was in her early 50s running across this restaurant parking lot into my grandpa's arms. And my grandpa said, I knew at that moment that she had forgiven me. And that was a huge moment in her life and a huge turning point in her complete health. I think from that point on, I don't even think she struggled again with the eating disorder. And if she did, it was very minor because she was back at a healthy weight. She was living life, enjoying life, and had overcome so many other things and was able just to really be at peace in that season of time for her life. And so it was a hard journey as a daughter, watching your mom go through this roller coaster of eating disorder behaviors and just the pain and the sorrow that goes along with it, and wanting recovery so much for somebody that you love and really not being able to help them because that was her own journey to walk out. And so I'm so grateful for the transformation that occurred, that she was able to have that freedom in the last few years of her life. And that brings me to wanting to talk about different kinds of therapy that is out there. After that, I did take a job at a PTSD treatment center, and I was introduced to EMDR therapy. And I will put that on the screen for you guys. EMDR is incredible for trauma. It is incredible for any PTSD symptoms, and I believe it's incredibly beneficial for all kinds of addictive behaviors and patterns. How EMDR works is it can be little things that you hold, little buzzers that you put in your hand, and they buzz left, right, left, right. People sometimes do tapping on their shoulders. You can do tapping on your knees, and it is a form of connecting your left and right sides of your brain and processing out the trauma. Now, there is tons of scientific information that backs up EMDR therapy as far as trauma tends to get locked in certain places in your brain, especially if you were traumatized as a child and your brain hadn't fully developed. Your body doesn't know what to do with the trauma, so it kind of locks it into certain places. And as you grow up, as protective mechanisms, you either avoid it or you come up with other coping skills to try not to have to deal with it. As we all know, it tends to come out sometime or another in some form, whether that is in an addiction or in a destructive behavior. It will come out eventually, and it can't stay locked in there forever. So what EMDR therapy does is it helps you process through trauma, and as you're processing that trauma and you're stimulating both sides of your brain, it helps the neurotransmitters to connect and actually process out that trauma properly and in a healthy way to be able to release it, feel those emotions of it, and be able to let it go. I have been through EMDR therapy myself, and when I watched these patients come through who they would do EMDR therapy 2 to 3 times a week, and how it completely transformed their lives. And I'm going to give you a couple examples. I had multiple patients that would come in and couldn't even share the reason that they were in treatment or seeking treatment because they would literally freeze up. They wouldn't even be able to talk about it, or they would start shaking or crying uncontrollably, or maybe they could get out the first part but never be able to actually finish the rest of their story. And as they would go through the treatment program, we would be there every day with them, seeing their progress. It was incredible to watch how these patients would come in and not even be able to talk about anything, to when they were getting ready to be discharged and go home, we would actually sit at a dinner table having dinner together. It was a home that had 8 beds, and so we would constantly have turnover. Some patients would have been there for a month or two, and some would just be coming in. What was so impactful to me is that I would be sitting at a dinner table and we would have gotten 1 or 2 new patients, and they would ask the patients who had been there a while, how has this program helped you? Have you noticed a difference in your life because of it? And then to hear these patients sit there and share their whole story to these new patients that were just coming in, and at the end of their sharing, they would just look at me and say, oh my gosh, that is the first time I was able to even share that without crying, without having a panic attack, without shutting down. And so EMDR therapy was extremely beneficial to help them process through that trauma and be able to release it. Cognitive behavioral therapy does help. It helps change your thought patterns, change some of the patterns of your life. And that does take time and it does take discipline. And I do think that those 2 modalities together work really well. You can do just cognitive behavioral therapy and try and change your thought patterns and processes. But if you're not getting to the root of the issue and dealing with whatever trauma or event or abuse happened in your life that started causing some of these behaviors, then you're not dealing with the issue. So I believe that both of those combined is extremely important. And then the third component is, with God, all things are possible. So I have seen people have encounters with the Lord and be completely free and transformed. And I've also seen how soul searching and getting to the place of really allowing God to move into some of those places and get healing and restoration and forgiveness then has allowed the healing process to take hold and also stick and really transform them to where it isn't something they end up going back to. I just want to encourage you that if you know of somebody or if you are struggling with an eating disorder, please, please, please seek help. Start with therapy. If you need a treatment center, find a good treatment center near you that has the tools to help you be able to walk into recovery and not let that have a hold of you anymore. It's so important. I've heard a million stories working in the field for 12 years. I've heard how eating disorders started just because a girl was maybe slightly overweight, lost a few pounds, got lots of positive reinforcement for that, lots of compliments, and all those positive comments just kind of switch something in her brain where she just thought, oh, if I'm getting so much positive feedback from this, what happens if I lose a little bit more weight or a little bit more weight? Another patient, she just had a friend group that was dabbling in trying to find ways to manipulate their weight for homecoming dance or a prom. And so they tried, throwing up after every meal or a couple times a week to try and maintain that weight. And they were just doing it for fun to see what happened. And then she started doing it and it ended up becoming this horrible pattern in her life and she could never break free from it. And so that was so sad because it just started out as something she did with her friends for fun, and it just totally snowballed into this huge eating disorder in her life. And of course, I had patients that had extreme and severe trauma, and that was why they were there. And then there were lots of young girls who ended up in treatment because of their moms and their mom's poor body image, constantly calling themselves fat, constantly dieting, talking about how there's bad food and good food, and really body shaming themselves and maybe body shaming their daughters. Just those patterns, especially as children, you just pick up on that stuff. And so we had multiple patients that would have been there because of mom's struggle with weight or dieting or their own eating disorder, and then they just picked up on those patterns and started mirroring those same patterns, and then it ended up controlling their life. So it's just very important. As a mom, I really tried hard to always have very positive feedback in regards to food and eating, everything in moderation. It's good to exercise, it's good to eat, it's good to abstain at some points, and it's good to indulge and treat yourself. And so really having a healthy mindset with food is so important. And I will never forget in 4th grade when my daughter came home from school and she learned in PE all about calories, and she told me, she goes, do you know that there's 100 calories in a Rice Krispie treat bar? And I'm like, yes, I know that, but why do you know that? And so just really encouraging her, hey, don't compare yourself to other girls. Do not get obsessed with calories. Eat because you're hungry. Stop eating when you're full. And if you're struggling with something, let's talk about it and figure out a healthy way to deal with it. Please don't ever take on an unhealthy relationship with food or exercise, or compare yourselves to other people and maybe what they're doing or not doing. And so I really tried to always keep an open door of communication in regard to that, because, you know, after working in the field, I was very like, oh my gosh, I don't want any of my kids to struggle with this. It's horrible. I just wanted to kind of share my story and my mom's story in this, and what that was like for her and what it was like for me growing up. I hope that it helps. I hope that it is encouraging or eye-opening in some way to give some insight into what eating disorders look like, how it can affect families, and some of the ways you can get help and treatment and recovery for that, and really be able to help those around you have a healthy relationship with food. I don't want our society to go back to having these very unhealthy images of women and beauty being stick and rail thin and malnourished. That is not healthy. Beauty does come in all shapes and sizes, and as a society, we don't need to be idolizing only one body type and having it be unhealthy, because for some people, they can live with that struggle their entire life. And I don't want that for anybody. Thank you guys so much for hanging in there with me today, for listening to my story. I just pray that this video really has a far reach, and not just for women. There are guys who struggle with eating disorders as well. And so please, if you're struggling, get help, reach out, tell somebody, and get the help that you need to be able to start your own road to recovery. Please comment down below if you have any questions, or if you've walked through your own story with an eating disorder. Let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts and to hear your stories. Thank you so much for watching Tina's Leg, where every day is leg day.